Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Bible study. We are studying the Gospel of John, and we are in the 6th chapter, and we're going to do this in 3 parts. If you have any questions about the study that you would like answered or addressed, you can email me at therevpepsi@gmail.com. So the feeding of the 5,000. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up to the mountain, sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. And when he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy enough bread for these people to eat?" Now he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that they had done, they began to say, "Indeed, this is a prophet who has come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and to take him by force and to make him a king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. So we have this feeding of the 5,000. A little bit of background to the passage. Bread was a staple food in Palestine. It was also a basic diet. And bread is also a synonym, of course, for scripture, the food. The food that sustains physical life as well as spiritual life. The bread of the well-to-do was made of wheat, that of the poor was barley. But rich and poor viewed bread as a basic element in the daily diet. It was the woman's task to grind grain daily and to mix it with water and olive oil and to cook the day's supply of bread. Bread was baked in a variety of ways inside hollow hive-like oven or flat cakes on its side. Jesus could have found no more powerful way to affirm that he was the source and sustainer of spiritual life than to compare himself to the bread that sustains physical life of all his listeners. So we have this passage, and it's the feeding of the 5,000. John, the gospel writer, records some of the facts and the words of Jesus in the Galilean region. And we know that this crowd has followed Jesus because of what they have seen Jesus do for the sick. This miracle of the feeding of 5,000 is also mentioned in the other Gospels. Luke mentions that on this occasion Jesus went out to a deserted place to be alone, yet the crowds followed him. In spite of this imposition, Jesus still served the multitude with great compassion. The Greek verb in John 6:2, the multitude kept following, is telling us that they saw signs where he performed of those who were diseased. It is they continually saw the signs, or he habitually did for the sick. Now Jesus went to the mountaintop, he sat down there to pray, and he's there with his disciples. This would have been the Golan Heights, and this would have overlooked the level plain of the east of the river and the lake. Now we're told this has taken place at the time of the Passover, or the upcoming Passover and the Festival of the Jews. John is only one of the four gospel writers who told us the timing of this. The multitude would have been made up of pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem, and probably many Galileans. Passover is of course associated with the Exodus and God's sustenance of Israel in the wilderness. It also is a reminder that as the slaves were being freed, they had to make the mark so that their house was passed over from the plagues. Jesus would soon sustain the multitude in their small wilderness with bread from heaven, both literally and spiritually. So Jesus, he sees the crowd, he asks Philip, where can we buy bread to feed these people? Jesus perhaps asked Philip the question because he was from Bethsaida and was near where the miracle took place. We're told that he said this to test him because he knew what he was going to do. Jesus knew what miracle he was about to perform, but he wanted the opportunity to teach Philip and the other disciples. See, Jesus wasn't just about getting the job done, about feeding the multitude, but also about teaching, feeding his disciples along the way. Philip had already seen Jesus do miracles, so he should have caught on. But he doesn't. He says 6 months' wages, it's not even going to give them a little bit of bread. That's about 200 denarii, and it's not sufficient enough. So their problem was at least in two parts. First, they didn't have the resources to buy the bread to feed the multitude. Second, even if they had the money, it would be impossible to purchase enough bread to feed them all. Philip's knowledge of the situation was accurate and impressive, but his knowledge was useless in getting the job done. See, sometimes we have this earthly knowledge, we're able to figure out facts and figures and that, but we do not put God into the equation. Philip is thinking, of course, in terms of money and how much money it would take to carry out God's work in just a small way. And it's interesting, when he says about the 6 months' wages, he's saying that's only so that they would have a little. It's not going to fill them. See, we often limit God in the same way, looking for how God's work can be done in the smallest way. And Jesus wanted a completely different approach, and he provided it in such a big way. Now, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, one of my favorites, he said to him, there's a boy, he's got 5 barley loaves, 2 fish, but what are they among so many people? So Andrew here is again introducing somebody to Jesus. You know, first it was his brother Peter, and now it is a young boy with some barley loaves and 2 small fish. And the phrase here sometimes is translated as lad, but it really means a little boy. So 5 barley loaves. Barley was regarded as a simple food, more often fit for animals than people. It means that the young boy came from a poor family. Barely scarcely bore 1/3 of the value of wheat. 2 small fish, asparia, indicating that they were 2 small salted fishes to be eaten almost like a relish with the cakes of barley. These would be kind of like little sardines. And what are they among so many? Well, it wasn't much to work with, but God doesn't need much. In fact, God doesn't actually need our help. He just likes to work through us. And he deliberately does this on this occasion. You see, I love that God uses small things here. he's using the lunch of a poor boy, very small lunch. Barley that was used for the poor, fish that were like sardines. But small things are not always what we view them, especially in the hands of God. These small things will do a great thing. So Jesus makes the people sit down. There's grass in this place, and we're told there are 5,000. Now that would be the counting of the men. And so this crowd would probably be much larger with the women and children added to that count. The number 5,000, 5 is of course a Jewish number, and this is taking place in a Jewish area. This passage of Jesus having them sit down almost reminds me of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. Here is having the people sit down in a green pasture. So Jesus takes the loaves, he gives thanks, he distributes them to those who are seated, and so also the fish, as much as they wanted. It almost is communal language here, and you look at the Gospel of Mark with the feeding of 5,000, the 4,000, and the Lord's Supper, and it's very much communal language. Jesus only had a few loaves of bread, a few fish. He gives his Father thanks for what he did, for what he did have. The miracle resides in the hands of Jesus, not in the distribution. Little is so much in his hands. The disciples did not do the miracle, they simply distributed the miraculous works of Jesus. And that's always something that we need to be mindful of. And what it is we do is not really what we're doing, but what God is doing through us. The glory and the credit goes to God, not to us. He's a good preacher, he's a good pastor, he or she is a good preacher, she is a good pastor, she or he is a good deacon, or a good singer, or musician. It is God working through them. The 5 loaves were multiplied by division, breaks it, and by the distribution he gives it. And we're told that they ate as much as they wanted. God's supply was extravagant. As much as they wanted, all ate until they were completely satisfied. Most of you will know the story of the prodigal son. The word prodigal means extravagant, because the prodigal son was extravagant in his waste. But the Father was extravagant in his love, and here we have Jesus extravagant in his miracle. So after everybody's satisfied, the disciples are told to gather up the fragments left over so that nothing is lost. They gather them up, and they have 5 barley. These 5 barley loaves are now 12 baskets full. Again, 12 being a Jewish number, 12 tribes of Israel. The 5 was from the 5 books of the Torah. So they were filled. Jesus was generous, giving everyone as much as they wanted. It's a remarkable miracle. Some think the disciples should have or could have anticipated Jesus doing such a thing. And you would think that they would, but they didn't, and we are much like them. Even though we've seen God work in great ways, we get to the next crisis, we get to the next situation. What is it we're going to do? How are we going to do it? And we forget that it is God going to be doing it through us. The term used for basket usually denotes a large basket, so this isn't something small. And it would be sort of a basket used for fish or bulky objects. And so we see Jesus feeding the 5,000. And the story is a good reminder of so many things. We've got Philip who despite his great talents doesn't know how we're going to resolve the situation. You've got Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, who brings and introduces a child to Jesus with the resources. On the surface it's not enough to get the job done, but he puts it in the hands of Jesus. And then we have Jesus who takes this small lunch, he blesses it, he breaks it, he gives it to all those who are sitting there, and everybody eats to their fill. Doesn't matter what the question is, ultimately Jesus leads us or works through us to the answer, because the answer is always found in Jesus. I hope you've enjoyed the Bible study, and we'll see you next week. God bless.